If you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
This has been another episode sponsored by Online Horse College. If you haven't had a look at the wide variety of equine-specific accredited courses, then go to onlinehorsecollege.com and I'll see you over there. Today's Horse Chats has been brought to you by Sophie Barrington and Archer Creative. So if you're frustrated by a low return on investment from your marketing efforts, have a talk to Sophie. Talk to her about copywriting, public relations, social media, email marketing, graphic design and website design. If you're after details, go to horsechats.com, search for Sophie, search for Barrington or search for Archer Creative and you'll find all her contact details. But meanwhile, we've got Deborah Jones on today. Now, Deborah's been a coach. She's had a background in teaching show jumping, dressage and eventing, but we're going to talk to her today about track work riding and what she does because she teaches track work riding and the difference between track work riding and some of the more classical ways of riding. How are you today, Deb?
Great, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good. Deb, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on teaching track work riders today because, sometimes people think that it's totally different and sometimes people think, I could do that, but it really is a little different, isn't it?
Yes, it is, absolutely. It is quite different from say, event riding.
Yep. All right. Now, before we start, we normally start off with a favourite quote. What's your favourite quote for us?
Oh, goodness.
I've thrown you in the deep end there, have I?
Yeah.
I should have warned you. Yeah.
It's probably one it's a little bit cheesy, I think, but it's from the movie Seabiscuit.
Yes.
And doesn't really have anything to do with track riding, but it was in the movie. I don't know whether it's a real quote from life, from the actual story of Seabiscuit, or whether it was just one made up from the movie. But you don't throw a whole life away just because it's broke up a little. Mm-hmm. So that's really my little quote, and it really relates to horses that have had a career in racing,
yep,
and then are coming back into doing something else, their second bite at life.
Yeah.
So really that's sort of what it comes from. Yeah.
Yes, and because you've had a bit of a background in both, you can sort of come in and say, right, well, they can have that second bite, but maybe they need to be trained just a little different to a horse who hasn't had that experience, and this is how you do it.
Exactly, yes. And because they're trained a certain way to run fast and pretty much not a lot else,
yep,
they're really not suited for their life after racing. So you do have to take that into account. You do have to take into account that they've perhaps been handled badly or trained badly.
Yes.
It's not their fault that they're the way they are. I always believe it comes back to the handler or the trainer, the person who broke them in the first place. But they are a little bit broken and they do need to be handled with care and retrained and retaught how to do things that equestrian riders expect of them.
Yeah. Now, how did you come into this whole teaching track riding? Had you had a background in racing before you started teaching track work riding? Were you already a track work rider? What's your background there?
Look, I worked in the racing industry a very, very long time ago when I was a teenager in my late teens, early 20s, and I worked in a stable as a stable hand and did some track riding. But then in 2003, I did the racing course. I did a racing course, Cert 3, Cert 4 in racing, and Cert 3 in racing track rider. And that sort of really started my interest in track riding itself as an occupation and as a teacher. I was already a teacher, but that sort of piqued my interest in it a little bit more. And then I got a job teaching at a TAFE, and that's part of my job, teaching people to become stable hands and track riders.
So people working in the racing industry, if they wanted to get started, someone who wants to get started, they might have because the way I look at it is there's always jobs available in the racing industry.
Yes.
There's often jobs available, and it is a high turnover for some people, but some people have been in it all their life. So just thinking of the numbers, if people are starting to look for a job with horses, that's what they wanted to do. I know when I first came back from overseas and I was qualified, I used to ride a bit of track work in the morning because the hours suited, so I could ride track work and then still go and teach during the day. Those hours just suited. So I had a steady stream of income when I was first starting, even if it rained or whatever, I still had that income. And then as the lessons progressed, I took less and less track works rides. And then I ended up just teaching all the time. But it was good, almost like a bit of a, fill-in job for me, when I was doing that. And I know a lot of people work in stables and have that other horse job. They still got time to do their horses and everything in between. So how can people get into that?
Well, I think, that's a good question, because there are a lot of people who are already stable hands and also have a background of riding as, say, event riders, or they've been through Pony Club. So there's two ways, really. They can either have a job with a trainer who's really encouraging and has the time to say to them, well, look, you can hop on a quiet horse and you can have a ride and slowly work your way up and we'll see how you go.
Yep.
But that's probably the way I would least like it to happen, only because there's not that many trainers that do have the time to do it properly. They're very, very busy with their own work that they have to do. So they can go and do a course, and not even a whole course. They can do units out of a course, which are the specific riding units, so they can gain the skills that they need, the techniques to ride horses that are in work and are fit, and they can learn to ride to time, because that's a very different speed.
Yes. But even before that, just to get started working in stables, I'm just thinking as a job as a strapper without even the riding.
As a stable hand.
Yeah. So I think some places say you must be qualified before you start. Some say so long as you're qualified within a certain amount of time, you're registered and you can go in as a trainee. Is that right?
Yeah, you can walk up to a stable with your resume and hand it in, and you may get a job straight away if you've had a little bit of a background working with horses. In Victoria, there are mandatory units, so you need to, within the first 12 months of becoming a registered stable hand, you need to complete the 2 units, which are handle horses. At this present time, still handle horses, and an OH&S unit. So they're the mandatory units, which once you've completed those, you become a licensed stable hand, or you've got 12 months to complete those. You're a licensed stable hand, and you can become, or you can start working in the industry and become a strapper, and you can also track ride, because in Victoria there's no mandatory units for track riding as such.
Is there the best way to just get started? Is the best way to contact racehorse trainers? Is there an agency? How would they do that? Just to contact the trainers direct?
Pretty much contact the trainers direct, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, just go to the stables. As long as they've got some good basic knowledge and horse handling skills. I have taught people and do teach people who want to get into the racing industry, but they have never handled a horse before.
That makes it tricky.
Yeah, well, it does, but if they apply themselves, where I teach is we have a lot of ex-racehorses, and all facilities that are very similar to a racing stable. So I've had a student who started off with very, very little experience, or pretty much no experience, was very nervous around the horses, but his dream was to work in a racing stable, and preferably to work at somewhere like Godolphin, which by the end of the year we had got him a job at Godolphin, and he is now working as a strapper there. So within a 10-month period, he learned everything he needed to learn, and he was then able to get a job at Godolphin, which was Yeah, and he's there now, strapping the horses
Brilliant.
and taking them to the races. So it's a fantastic way for somebody who doesn't have the knowledge or the expertise to get into it, is to do a course.
Good. Now, you said one of the skills that he had was that he applied himself. What else would you say that people need to have that, to be able to work in that industry?
Well, you definitely need to love horses. I mean, that's the first prerequisite, really, I think, is because, as we all know, it's not a fantastically paid job. It's hours that are very, very difficult to keep and to have any sort of a social life. If you're a stable hand, you're working very early in the morning, and as you would know, and then you've got a bit of a break during the day, and then you're back in the afternoon. So it's very difficult to have another job as well as a stable hand job. So you just absolutely have to love working with the horses and have the will to succeed in an area that can be difficult environment to work in. So yeah, I think you really need initiative and confidence as well.
Okay. What do you think then, for someone who's worked in the industry, what's the best thing about working in that racing industry?
I think it's the pride of being around such beautiful animals that you take to the races and you see them do well in a race. It's getting to know the horses and just being around horses all the time. I mean, I've worked with horses now for 40 years, and I guess in various ways and in various disciplines. And it really always comes down to the fact that you just love being with horses. And I know when I was younger, and I worked at a place in Queensland called Andalusia Park, where Andalusians would put on a show for tourists. And I think I earned about $80 a week for a 6-day week, and the boss said to me, you should just be grateful that you're actually here, and you can do something with horses and something you love. And, that was a really old-fashioned way of looking at it but that was a typical sort of attitude that people had, was that, you love your horses, so here you go, you can work with them every day and get a little bit of pay at the same time. Fortunately, that attitude has changed, but I think it's just something. Working with such magnificent animals, the thoroughbreds really are incredible, incredible animals, incredible athletes.
Yep. And then taking those athletes on to become performance horses. Have you got any good sort of case studies or something where you've had horses that you've worked with as a racehorse and they've gone on to do to become a good performance horse, or you've known someone that's got a good performance horse that's been a racehorse in the past?
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, there's so many cases of them being able to go from that environment and then go into the performance horse environment. I have a couple of thoroughbreds, one of which was reasonably successful as a racehorse, and he hasn't done we haven't done anything, amazing with him, but he has adapted to the life of being just a pleasure riding horse, and he's been wonderful for that. Where I work, we have 27 ex-racehorses, and they've gone on to teach people. And so they've not only been racehorses that have been on a high performance diet, that have been, athletes that are at the top of their game and full of energy, and then gradually with training, they were able to actually have beginners on them and be able to teach them to ride and teach them to do track work and teach them how to handle horses. And they're an integral part of any trainer or any coach is the horses they work with. So I think there's an enormous amount of things that thoroughbreds can go on to do, and it's just a matter of how good the retraining is of them after they finish their life as a racehorse.
Okay. Now, for someone who has a racehorse, might have raced today, didn't go as fast as what the owners had hoped, and they sort of said, well, this is the last time, we're putting a lot of time, because it is expensive to train a racehorse.
It is.
Yeah. And, good type of horse, sound, and someone gets it and calls you up very excited, says, Debbie, I've got a horse, he raced today, I'd like to have him now as a jumper or an eventer. What sort of general advice would you give them over the next few months particularly?
Well, I think it depends on what their own experience is with horses. If they're not terribly experienced, then obviously they need the help of somebody who is, that can help with the retraining. But if they have some knowledge and riding skills, I think the most important thing to do to begin with is to get to know the horse, allow the horse some time to actually be away from the racetrack and be in a paddock and get all of the things out of their system that they've been fed over that period of time, and just be a horse for a little while, and then start to handle them and do groundwork with them so that they can be sure that they know what the responses are going to be like from the horse, what cues they understand, whether they have got a stop button, because that's really important when you're going to get on a horse for a first time, that you want to know that it stops. So just a lot of groundwork with it before actually getting on the horse, so that they have a good idea of what they're in for once they actually do get onto the horse. And if they find they don't have that understanding of the cues of the stop and go, then they need to make sure that they train those before they get on the horse.
Okay, so the stop, go. And then if they've got those cues, they've got, stop, go, maybe even a bit of reverse or sideways. But then when they first get on the horse, that first bit of jumping, what do they need to have the horse doing before they even start with any pole work or anything like that? What would be the next stage?
For me, I like to be able to hop on a horse and just have it go nicely in the paces, to establish a rhythm, a natural sort of a rhythm, and make sure the horse can go straight, and just be able to walk, trot and canter on either rein in a nice, relaxed sort of outline without putting too much strain on the horse to begin with. But ideally you want something that has a bit of self-carriage and will be able to just a nice trot and a canter, and will be able to just sort of work nicely for you in an arena without rushing and without getting tense, and that's difficult to begin with, and horses can change obviously with their training and time. But I would say taking it very slowly, doing the groundwork, hopping on, doing the flat work, and just getting to know the horse really well before you start to introduce the poles and that sort of thing. And I mean, it may have had a great education when it was broken, and it may have been ridden by very good riders. I mean, you see some horses, I've hopped on many race horses that have come straight out of work, and they've been lovely to ride. They've had a good education, and their mouths are good, and they're sort of quite settled in their head, and they can go straight on, a little bit faster into doing the work. But it really just depends on the background that the horse has had, and the horse's history is very important.
Okay. If you're an equestrian coach or a horse riding instructor, or even if you aspire to be one, have a look at the free video series for horse riding instructors on the Horse Chats website. Go there now, have a look, horsechats.com. And I think that's the groundwork that you said, making sure they can sort of stop and go on command. I think that's probably a really good one as well, for those ex-race horses. For someone then who's done a bit of jumping, done a bit of eventing, and then they go on and they come to you and they say, Deb, I want to be a track work rider. What sort of things do they need to learn to become a track work rider?
Well, it's a very different position. It can start off, somebody that comes to us who's been through Pony Club or who has had an eventing background are ideal to start with. And it's also great too to have somebody who doesn't have any background at all but just happens to ride well. So either way, it works really well. But it is a very different position. The speeds are so much faster than they are when you're riding cross country. So they need to really change the way they sit. They need to have their stirrups so much shorter. They need to become very fit, and they need to learn specific techniques to pull up a horse that's going very fast, or a horse that you actually don't really want to go that fast, but he's received a signal. It's made him think that that's what you want him to do, so he has picked up a bit of speed. So it's really it's something that you do have to adapt a few areas of your own riding to it, and you need to love going fast. If you're nervous at all, it's not something that you really want to do.
Okay, and then you talked about riding to time before as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about riding to time?
Yeah, sure. In working racehorses or conditioning racehorses, they have what's called half pace, 3/4 time, evens, and a working gallop or working home. And they're all timed over 200 metres. So if you were asked to ride a horse at half pace, you'd be sort of looking at around about 20, 21, 22 seconds per 200 metres. Then for 3/4 pace, you're looking at around about, say, 18, 19 seconds for 200 metres. Evens is 15 seconds. It varies a little bit between trainers, but 14, 15 seconds. And then working home is just you you're asked to push the horse out as fast as it can go, basically. So we teach the students to count the seconds in their head to begin with, so that they can get an idea of how many seconds it's taking them to do the 200 metres. Once they get good at actually counting, because it's a tricky thing, you can sit quietly in a room with a stopwatch and time. But once you introduce other factors into it, like the wind blowing, a horse galloping, other horses jostling around you, it does make it a little bit harder. So, yeah, we spend quite a bit of time doing that, teaching them how to count to time. And, of course, track riders have beepers, so they can eventually use beepers, but we would like them to get a feel. And every horse is different. It's amazing how one horse doing 15 seconds to the furlong or to the 200 metres can feel very, very different from another one, and you think you're going a lot faster than you actually are. So there's a lot of that sort of practice. Yep. And we teach that on a track, as well as putting them on different horses that have different quirks and different habits. And some of them are a bit stronger, some of them take a bit to get going, some of them don't like to be working alongside another horse. So there's quite a lot of things that you can learn to do, as well as the actual position and technique of riding. And I don't know, when you ride short, it's really taxing on your legs. So that's a fitness thing too, that people need to actually allow time for their fitness to progress to the point where they can do that on 7 or 8, 9, 10 horses a morning.
Yes. Yep.
When they ride the track.
For sure. What do you think then, if you think of, the students that you might have in a year, what do you think is the most common problem? You did talk about confidence, but apart from confidence, if they come in and they're confident, what do you think is the most common thing that you say this is what needs to be improved? Is it the fitness or is it something else?
It's generally position, I think, because everyone does tend, unless they haven't had an eventing or pony club background, they tend to ride in a much more upright position. Okay. So, because that's a natural position for cross country. You're forward, you're out of the saddle, but you're still upright, fairly upright. And you think about a track rider or a jockey, once you start moving along quite quickly, the upper body is almost parallel to the horse's back. So it's probably the position that people find the hardest. Okay. And also the reins. Holding the reins in a bridge is so easy when you're cantering around nicely on a well-educated horse. But when you've got a horse that or we might say to them, if you change your bridge and you lose contact, this horse is going to go faster, because that's what he was taught to do. And as much as we retrain them to not do that, they're going to fall back into that pattern if riders continue to do it. So that's another thing, I think, too, just holding the reins, being able to change their bridge or shorten the reins without losing the contact.
Yep.
Otherwise, as quick as a wink, the horses are accelerating.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think there's those sort of things probably, I would say. If someone has confidence, then all those things are trainable, really. And look, I have had students who have jumped off horses in a blind terror, but they've gone on to become a jockey or become successful track riders. So, yeah, that can be. You can work on the confidence.
Good. Or I'd like to talk to you a bit more about that too, sort of steps to go on and become a jockey. But I think, what you've said today is a lot for people to digest, if they're thinking about going and having that complementary job. As I said, I did it for a while. It was good, it was a good steady income and I enjoyed the work. And I think just even working as a strapper in a racing stable, what if you're teaching a strapper to take a horse, to lead it out somewhere, to take it to the races, what sort of handling tips would you give them? Knowing that they might have had a bit of experience with their own quiet horses, but not with race horses that are full of feed and at the races and quite high strung and quite excitable.
Well, yeah, we obviously there's different gear that they would be using. If they're leading a horse at the races, they've got a bridle on. Generally, when they're taking the horse into the mounting yard, for example, they've got a bridle on the horse and a double clip lead, or else they're leading the horse around with a head collar and a rearing bit. So they've always got a bit in the horse's mouth. So they've got that, bit more control than just a head collar. We like to try to say to teach the students that if it's possible, and it's probably not at the races, but if it's possible to just keep addressing the fact that the horse does need to listen to the stop when you're trying to slow it down. It's no use walking around just constantly jabbing them in the mouth. It's no use constantly hanging on to them. A racetrack during race day is not the time to do a little bit of training, but we do try to teach our students that that's something that maybe they can work on when they have time, when they're leading a horse around at the training stables.
Yes.
They can perhaps work on improving those things so that then it does translate to the horse being better at the races and therefore better when it finishes racing. So I think that's the main thing, that we really try and instill in them the understanding of how horses learn and how horses respond to those cues so that they will be better. At the track, it's very hard because they're so excited and there's so much happening, and there's the adrenaline after a race, it's pouring through them. So it's not probably the best place to do it. But I think them having that knowledge when they go into work with race horses, I think it's just really important that they do have that understanding of how horses do learn.
Yep.
And that will help them in the long run. But one thing I would like to say too about track riding, as we know, it's a dangerous area and there's always been a lot of accidents. So the thing I really impress upon people is that if you have had a riding background and you do choose to go to a racing stable and offer your services, make sure that you know who you're dealing with and that you know that this person who is going to give you a go is going to put you on a quiet horse. It's not, the trainers don't deliberately throw people on horses that are crazy and say, there you go, take this horse around the track. They don't want them hurt. They don't want them injured, but these things can happen. So it's better to get some training if you possibly can, some lessons, and ride thoroughbreds, because as we know, they're so different to riding a lot of other horses, especially when they're in work and they're on high energy feeds. So going in with that little bit of caution and thinking that I'll really do my research, I'll really find out about the person that I'm going to, I'll find out what the horses are like, I'll observe them at race day if I possibly can, I'll ask other people about them, and if I'm really not that sure that that's the right pathway for me to take, I'll go to somewhere and get some training, initial training, before I go and do some riding. I think that's what's the real key thing.
I think that's really good advice too, Deb. And I think too, there were a couple of really good gold nuggets that you've said. I think the training is absolutely critical. You've either got to go to someone who's going to give you the training or get some training, because it is different to riding cross-country even.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. Yes, that's right. And the cross-country times are obviously much slower too. So you don't have to push the horses to those speeds. You don't then have to deal with the fact that the horse may be getting strong and difficult to pull back, and you're not working alongside another horse. And the competitiveness of a horse in that situation really comes to the fore, because when they're cantering or galloping across a paddock by themselves, they're a lot easier to manage than they are when they've got somebody working alongside.
And a lot easier to put on a circle if you need to. If your horse is really going and you've got a problem, then you can circle, whereas you can't in the middle of a track. If you've got horses coming and going everywhere, you can't just say, I'll just pop in a little circle here.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Definitely not.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, and I think good advice about, the bridged reins too, that you might start off and think, right, my horse is going well, and then you want to increase the speed or something, or your hands just need adjusting. That picking up and changing the rein and having the bridge with contact, I think, is good. But one thing I did like particularly, Deb, was the fact that, you were saying that even in the stables, get your horse listening, get it stopping, get it going. The work on the ground with racehorses doesn't need to be any different to what it is with any other horse. The horse should be listening. It shouldn't just get worse and worse and worse and out of control. If it's got that really good basic training, it'll be a good horse to handle on the track and a good horse to handle after it's finished its racing career.
Yes, absolutely. And the same can be said for the track riders. I have heard of people say what a fantastic track rider this person is because he or she has had some dressage or equestrian background. They actually are getting the horse to lower its head while it's working, or they're correcting the straightness of the horse, and it makes such a difference to the horse when it races. So, they're praised because of their techniques that come to them from, their dressage training. So that's also something that we really try to impress as well, is that you don't just have to get out there and ride them fast and pull them up. You can actually be helping that horse to work better and therefore be a better racehorse for the trainer and the owners.
Yes.
It's straighter. It can stride out better. It's listening to you. It accelerates when it's asked to accelerate.
Yep.
The whole thing can be greatly improved by a good rider.
Yep, for sure. And then if the training's improved, then the horse understands what's going on, so that's better for the horse as well, which ultimately is what we're all looking for, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. Yep, absolutely.
All right, Deb, love talking to you today. I don't think we've had anyone on sort of talking in this much depth, certainly about, racehorses, training track work riders, riding track work and horses after they've raced. So a lot of good knowledge there, a lot of good tips there for people, who are working in that situation and who have thought about possibly doing that. So if people do want to contact you, Deb, what's the best way? What's your best?
They can contact me via my mobile number or email.
Okay. We'll put those details up. It'll be at horsechats.com/Deborah Jones, or go to horsechats.com, search for Deborah, DEBORAH, or search for Jones, and you'll find those contact details. If you'd like to talk to Deb, talk about the training that she does and any other tips. She's based in Melbourne, so I'm sure you can have a chat to her then. Okay, thanks very much, Deb, and we'll talk to you again sometime soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Now, if you're still there, you probably know that I'm absolutely passionate about education within the horse industry. That's why I host this podcast. My other venture is Online Horse College. Have a look now at onlinehorsecollege.com and I'll see you over there.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.